It is time. Oh, we need lights. It is time to finish out Mounce. Chapters, 34, 35, 36. Me verbs, optative, loose ends, cray-cray. We have reached the end. We started first week of January, and here we are, 22 weeks later, tackling the end of Mounce. Now, we still have 5 more weeks after this, translating 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, 4 John, and 5 John, putting everything that we have learned into practice. So it's exciting. But we're wrapping up, which is pretty cool and very exciting. Anyways, let me get signed in here because I got signed out for some reason. I don't know why. Okay, I'm in. Why did it sign me out? That was bizarre. So this week was a bit heavy by comparison to all other weeks. 3 different chapters, a lot of content in each chapter. But to be quite honest, me verbs are easy. They're easy. So let's dive in. Oh, there we go. Like I said, me verbs are easy. We won't spend a ton of time here because we really don't need to. Now, me verbs. All the verbs learned to date. We've been spending time with indicative. We've been spending time with the subjunctive, the infinitive, the participle. Every form we have seen, with the exception of me, has been, quote, thematic. All that means is the theme is they use a connecting vowel, right? You have your verbal stem, your tense stem, then you have a connecting vowel, and then you're either tense formative or your ending, okay? Me verbs are athematic. Now, don't let that mislead you. That does not mean it doesn't follow a theme. I think I mentioned this before, but I was incorrect. It's not that it's irregular, because it is regular. It just doesn't use connecting vowels. That's it. And so as a result, it has a slightly different look to it. And it's easy to see. Which is why I grouped 34, 35, and 36 together. Chapters 34, 35, and 36, okay? So that's what's going on. These are athematic, meaning they don't use connecting vowels. Now, eme is technically a me verb, but it's an atypical athematic verb. So it's kind of on its own. And as we established last week, the verb to be practically in every language, I don't know, in every language, but all the languages I've learned that are Indo-European or whatever that class is, to be is always one of a kind. And eme is no different in Greek. Now, there are 4 classes, and it's based on the stem endings. Omicron class, alpha class, epsilon class, epsilon class. You don't need to worry about that so much. But yeah, there are different classes. So just like contract verbs, in which all alpha contracts follow the same pattern, me verbs do the same thing within their classes. Okay, so it's good to be aware of the classes. You don't really need to memorize. We'll look at a few of the classes side by side here in a little bit. What you do need to learn are the 5 rules that govern me verbs, okay? First, me verbs reduplicate their initial stem letter to form the present and separate the reduplicated consonant with an iota, okay? So they reduplicate the initial stem letter, and then separate with iota. Look at tithemi. The initial stem letter is theta. So to reduplicate, it would use a tav. And then it's separated by iota. Okay? Me verbs do not ordinarily use a connecting vowel in the present indicative. Not to say that it can't. It's just saying that normally it doesn't. It doesn't typically use a connecting vowel in the present indicative. And that's why we're saying it's athematic. Third, me verbs employ 3 different personal endings in the present active indicative. You have first person singular, third person singular, third person plural. Everywhere else, it's following the same thematic endings. So you'll need to learn the first person singular, third person plural. The stem vowels of me verbs can lengthen, shorten, or drop out. This is otherwise known as, you got it, ablaut. And last, most of the me verbs use kappa alpha as their tense formative in the aorist. Kappa alpha. Kappa alpha. So there you have it. Those are the 5 governing rules for me verbs. Look at these. Here's an istimi. The stem, I believe, is it ista or is it sta? I think it's sta. But because in me verbs it can ablaut, the alpha changes to an ida in a few instances and remains an alpha in the others. And then I believe, I'm trying to recall here, I think the iota comes on the front because instead of duplication, well, there is duplication, if I remember correctly. The sigma duplicates, the iota adds in, but then the first sigma drops out, and I think that's why there's a rough breather. I could be wrong on that, but I want to say that's... Anyways, so istimi. You can see me is the first person singular. The third person singular is seen. That looks familiar. And the third person plural is also seen, but instead of a ida, it's an alpha at the end of the stem. Okay? So other than that, istis, istamen, istate, these look relatively familiar, right? Tithemi, right? We already talked about the reduplication at the beginning. So we see the me ending. We see seen at the third person singular. Then the third person plural, instead of a simple epsilon sigma iota ni, there's an alpha. So I want to say, if I remember correctly, the ending itself is asin, which is a little different. With istimi, you get the alpha becomes an alpha with a circumflex. But with tithemi, you keep the vowels separate, epsilon alpha, because it's not a contract. I think that's what's happening. I could be wrong there too. It's not important to know exactly what's happening here. Let me say that again. It's not important to know what's happening. What's crucial is to be able to recognize it. Recognize what you're dealing with. Okay? So when you see istasin, you should know third person plural, present active indicative from istimi. When you see titheasin, you should know third person plural, present active indicative of tithemi. Okay? Look at didomi. You've got me, first person singular. You've got seen for the third person singular. You got asin for the third person plural. Otherwise, it looks relatively the same. Sigma in the second person singular, men in first person plural, te in the second person plural. Okay? So that's all in the present. Look at the imperfect. We'll use didomi just because it's clean and simple. Didomi becomes edidun, edidus, edidu, edidomen, edidote, edidun. Okay? So I was giving, you were giving, he was giving, we were giving, you all were giving, they were giving. Remember, in the imperfect first person singular and third person plural, they're identical. Context is key. In the future, you add the sigma. That's the sigma tense formative. Doso, dosis, dose, or dosi, dosomen, dosete, dosusen. So I will give, you will give, he will give, we will give, you all will give, they will give. In the aorist, you see the kappa alpha. Edoka, edokas, edoken, edokamen, edokate, edokan. So I gave, you gave, he gave, we gave, you all gave, they gave. And then the perfect. Dedoka, dedokas, dedokan, dedoken, dedokamen, dedokate, dedokan. So I have given, you have given, he has given, we have given, you all have given, they have given. Notice it's kappa alpha in the perfect for the tense formative, identical to the aorist. Oh no, whatever shall we do? Well, calm down. It has reduplication. Right? Dedoka. So when you see kappa alpha, it could mean aorist, it could mean perfect. You need to look for reduplication or an augment. When you see an augment, now you know you're dealing with aorist. When you see reduplication, now you know you're dealing with perfect. It's all about finding the different puzzle pieces, right? You're putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Look at the big picture, right? You can't just look at the minute picture of the jigsaw piece. You got to put everything together and look at the big picture. Okay? So that is me verbs with the active indicative in the present, in the imperfect, in the future, in the aorist, and the perfect. Okay? Here's the active subjunctive. So remember, subjunctive does not have an augment because there's no time aspect. Okay? What we are dealing with is the continuous and undefined, meaning the present tense stem and the aorist tense stem. Dido, didos, dido, didomen, didote, didosin. Okay? So remember, when you're dealing with subjunctive, you add the helping word continuously when it's present tense stem. So I might give continuously. You might give continuously. He might give continuously. We might give continuously. You all might give continuously. They might give continuously. Okay? When we're dealing with undefined, the reduplication does not occur on the tense stem, right? Didome's tense stem is do. So to form the present active indicative, you take the delta, you duplicate it, and then you add a iota to separate it. Dido. Okay? The aorist doesn't do that. So you just take the tense stem and you apply the subjunctive endings. Do, dos, do, domen, dote, dosin. Okay? Because it's undefined, you don't use the helping word continuously. I might give, you might give, he might give, we might give, you all might give, they might give. Okay? That's the active subjunctive. Middle subjunctive, same principles, okay? So when you're dealing with the present tense stem, you're still going to have the duplication. When you have the aorist tense stem, no reduplication, okay? So, and then it's going to follow the primary middle passive endings. Me, o, te. Well, so it's not o, but it's me, se, te. But the sigma drops out, and then the alpha contracts, and then the iota subscripts. Me, se, te. So just keep that in mind, and then you see methes, the, and nte. That's all normal. So with the middle subjunctive, didome, dido, didote, didometha, didoste, didonte. I might give myself continuously. Boy, that's a mouthful. You might give yourself continuously. He might give yourself continuously. We might give ourselves continuously. You all might give yourselves continuously. They might give themselves continuously. In the undefined, take the tense stem, slap on the ending, boom, you got it. Dome, do, dote, dometha, doste, donte. But you don't add continuously because it's undefined. So I might give myself. You might give yourself. He might give himself. We might give ourselves. You all might give yourselves. They might give themselves. Okay? For the passive subjunctive, the present is the same, right? That follows the same rules we've been learning. So the continuous tense stem is going to be the same. Didome, dido, didote, didometha, didoste, didonte, rather. The undefined uses aorist, and as we learned, aorist passive uses theta as the tense formative, right? So we're going to have dotho, dothis, dothi, dothomen, dothite, dothosan, dothosin. So to translate that passively, again without continuously as the helping verb or helping word, I might be given, you might be given, he might be given, we might be given, you all might be given, they might be given. Okay? So that's the passive subjunctive. Let's look at the imperative. Same kind of principles. So present has the reduplication of the present tense stem. The undefined does not. The endings are the same that we've already learned, right? Didu, didoto, didote, didotosan. Dos, doto, dote, dotosan. Okay? So, and again, you use the same helping words or you don't, depending on the tense stem. So for continuous, you give continuously. Let him give continuously. You all give continuously. They give continuously. In the undefined, you give. Let him give. You all give. They give. Okay? So that's the active imperative. Here's the middle. And this one, remember, uses the secondary endings. Didoso, didosto, didoste, didostosan. Do, dosto, doste, dostosan. I don't know why this one has sigma theta. I think this is just unique to the imperative, if I remember correctly. So that's the middle imperative. Translating that reflexively, you give yourself continuously. Let him give himself continuously. You all give yourselves continuously. They give, let them give themselves continuously. Or undefined, you give yourself. Let him give himself. You all give yourselves. Let them give themselves. Okay? That's the middle. And then in terms of passive, the continuous, again, uses the same form. It's the undefined that is different, using the theta eta tense formative. Dothiti, dothito, dothite, dothitosan. Okay? So for the undefined, passively, you give yourself. Let him give, or not yourself, that's reflexive. You be given. Or you are given. Yeah, I think to really get the force of the imperative, it'd probably be you be given. Something like that. Let him be given. You all be given. And dothito-san, let them be given. For the infinitive, you can see all three, active, middle, and passive here, where the continuous is the same in the middle passive, following the same rules we've been utilizing. Didone, didoste. But the undefined has a separate one across the three. Dune, doste, dothine. Okay? So for the continuous, you've got to give continuously. You've got, if it's middle, then it would be to maybe give oneself, something like that. If it's passive, to be given. For the undefined, and so that's, for the continuous, it's didone, to give oneself, or to give continuously. For the middle would be to give oneself continuously. For the passive, to be given continuously. But the undefined just drops the continuously. So dune, to give, doste, to give oneself, dothine, to be given. Now let's look at the participle. What I did here, just to keep it simple, I didn't write the word out everywhere. Okay, so look at the continuous, for example. I wrote the active so you can see the masculine, feminine, and neuter. Deduce, dedusa, didone. It follows the same participle morphemes. That doesn't change. But keep in mind the third declension in the masculine and neuter, whereas it's first declension in the feminine. Okay, so what that means, if you remember, is it follows the nitav, didont, os. So sia, es, son, sina. So the genitive is omicron, sigma. Okay, so that's the active. The middle, men in the middle, all you need to be aware of is the sigma in the masculine, eta in the feminine, and ni in the neuter. Okay, and then it's not. This is second declension in the masculine and neuter, not third declension, and it's first declension in the feminine. So it's dido menu in the genitive for both the masculine and neuter. The passive follows the same rules in the continuous, so it's identical to the middle. When we get to the undefined, remember there's no reduplication of the first letter of the tense stem, so it's just deuce, not deduce. Okay? It's dontos, not didontos. Otherwise, it's identical to the active. Now, the middle is identical to the continuous without the reduplication. When we get to the passive, now we're dealing with a whole different ball of wax because we've got the theta tense formative, or theta epsilon to be more specific. Dothis, dothisa, dothen. That's the passive, nominative, singular, masculine, feminine, and neuter. Okay, the genitive follows third declension in the masculine and neuter, so dothentos, dothentos. But the feminine follows first declension, dothesis. Okay, so that's how you form the participle with me verbs. It really looks the same. Again, you can tell what you're dealing with. You learn your vocabulary. You learn the tense stems in the present. It's going to help you understand what you're dealing with. You don't have to memorize all the different forms of the me verbs. Just memorize the 5 governing rules. Memorize the vocabulary. Memorize the stem. Memorize those things, and you're going to be just fine. So that's me verbs. Let's move on to the optative mood, which we briefly touched base on when we covered subjunctive. Now, subjunctive is the mood of possibility. It's what is possible. It's what is probable. Optative is the mood of wish. It occurs 70 times in the New Testament. Now, it does not have an augment, so it's similar to the subjunctive in that regard. But what it does do different is it uses the omicron connecting vowel. Okay? It uses the first aorist tense formative, sigma alpha, which replaces the omicron. The first aorist tense formative uses theta epsilon, replacing the omicron. I believe that's for the passive. The optative uses iota following connecting vowel or tense formative. So you'll either have omicron iota, or you'll have sigma alpha iota, or theta epsilon iota. And then the aorist passive also adds eta after the iota. So with the aorist passive, you'll have theta epsilon iota eta. You're like, what? It's easy to find because you'll be like, what? So it uses the me verb endings in the first person singular active. So that would be me. Everywhere else, it follows secondary personal endings. So just be aware of it. You don't need to go out and memorize these. You don't need to practice conjugating optative. You just need to know that it's out there. And usually it'll look like subjunctive, but with extra vowels in there, and you'll be like, wait a second. This looks funny. And then you'll probably look it up and then be like, oh yeah, this is optative. The mood of wish. Now, as we translate, be aware there's a transitive and there's an intransitive verb. Transitive means the action of the verb transitions to a direct object. What this means is a transitive verb has or can take a direct object, okay? I hit the ball. The verb hit takes a direct object. Ball. Okay? Intransitive means that there is no action transitioning to a direct object. In other words, there is no direct object and the verb cannot take a direct object. I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe on the fly, I'm just trying to think of one. Maybe walk. I walk. You can't. I walk. Well, you could say, yeah, I walk the dog. That's a different verb, though. Let's see. Maybe pray. No, that could take a direct object. I pray the words. Depending, but you kind of get the idea. So some verbs will not be able to take a direct object, and I wanted you to be aware of this because you will see this is transitive. Oh, this is intransitive, and this is all it's referring to, whether it can take a direct object or not. So just be aware of that. And then what will happen is, depending on the semantics, BDAG will tell you if it's transitive, translate it this way. If it's intransitive, translate it that way. So because it is possible you could have a verb that's transitive in one context but intransitive in another, perhaps. So just be aware of those terms and look it up in BDAG. It'll help you. Now, let's talk about the definite article. We've mentioned it a lot. We have seen instances, especially with participles, where you won't translate it as the, right? Definite article is the. Take a look at Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics by Daniel Wallace. Look at pages 206 through 290. 84 pages on the uses of the definite article. I'm sorry, what? 84 pages on the uses of the definite article. Here's a brief list. Yes, you can translate it as the. It's the definite article. It could be anaphoric, where it's referring to the previous instance. Still translated the, but it's kind of like pointing backwards to the previous instance. Okay? It could be deictic, deictic. I don't know how to pronounce that correctly. Deictic. It points out something, and then you translate it demonstratively. This word, this thing, this it, whatever. Okay? It could be par excellence, where it marks something in a class by itself. The. That emphatic, the, not the. Okay? It could be monadic. It's like par excellence, except that it's the only one of its kind. It's unique. It's one of a kind. The. Okay? It could be a noun marker where it's used with a participle, but you don't translate it. It could be a personal pronoun where you actually translate it he, she, or it. It could be a possessive pronoun, his, hers, its. Or it could be a relative pronoun, who or which. This just goes to show that the definite article can be very flexible, which is why Wallace spends 84 pages expounding on all of this. Okay? So don't take the definite article for granted. Pause, look it up, and figure out, how is it actually being used? And then translate it accordingly. Sometimes you need to pause just to observe the full force of what it's doing semantically as well as syntactically. Semantically means within the range of meaning in relationship to other words. Syntactically means how it's functioning in the sentence in terms of structure and grammar. And depending on semantics and depending on syntax might inform how you understand and interpret the definite article. Okay? So don't take it for granted. Now, when you have the absence of the article, that may emphasize some sort of quality aspect. Typically, though, it's just not specific. It's nondescript. It's a girl, not the girl. So take a look at 206 through 290. It will talk about the absence of the article as well. This is good to just be aware of in case it's not there, which does happen all the time. Now, we've been talking about diacritical marks. They're really not important except for when they are. The same is true for sentence structure. Greek uses case endings. So it doesn't need word order like English does. But it does follow a normal word order. Verb, subject, object. This is just like Hebrew. VSO. Verb, subject, object. Say it with me. Verb, subject, object. VSO. Verb, subject, object. Typically, the verb comes first, the subject comes second, the object comes third. However, there's minor emphasis when the order is changed. And then what happens is emphasis is placed on the word that ends up coming first. This does happen all the time. So be aware of that. Normally, it's the verb that comes first, the subject that comes second, the object that comes third. But when things are reordered, whatever comes first is being given the emphasis or is emphasized. Okay, so just be aware of that. Be cognizant of that. Verb, subject, object. Now, we did previously talk about conditional sentences. We're revisiting it here in a little more depth. You have first class, second class, third class, and there is a fourth class, but not prevalent in the New Testament. So it's three that occur in the New Testament clearly. The first class is the conditions of fact. You have the protasis and you have the apodosis. If protasis, then apodosis. So in first class condition, the protasis, the if statement, is assumed to be true for the sake of the argument, whether it is true or not. Okay, so it can take a statement that everybody knows is false, but if it's in this conditional statement structure, for the sake of the argument, it becomes true. Okay, so for example, in English, if I were to say, we know Donald Trump is the current president of the United States. Okay, that is true. So if I were to say, if Donald Trump were never the president, then blank. Well, we know that's not true, but for the sake of the argument, that's what's happening. We're saying this is true. Okay? So that's how first class condition works. It assumes that the if statement is true for the sake of the argument, regardless of whether or not it is. Okay? The syntax is E, epsilon iota, plus indicative. E plus indicative. If, indicative. Okay? Secondary, this is the contrary to fact. And what that means is it assumes the protasis to be false, but it understands it to be true for the sake of the argument. So we know this is false. So this is probably better to the example I just used because we know it's false. But for the sake of the argument, we're saying this is true. So if Donald Trump were never president, then blank. Well, we're assuming that that's false. We know that to be false. But for the sake of the argument, we're making it true. Okay, so this is the secondary class. The way this one works is you see the protasis E indicative, but then you have in the apodosis on plus the indicative. So you cannot have a second class without both aspects. If you only have E indicative, then it's first class. You have to have E indicative plus on indicative, protasis, apodosis. Okay? That's how you form the second class. Third class is what we saw recently with the subjunctive. Generally speaking, it's the if A, then B. It's the simple condition. There's no expectations set concerning the protasis. It's just kind of generalized, okay? There are some specific use cases, but the syntax is aon plus subjunctive. Now, the specific use cases, you've got future more probable. This is a condition that might be true in the future. And what happens is you have aon plus subjunctive in the protasis, but in the apodosis, the verb can be in any tense. So, if the subjunctive I was about to say if the subjunctive is in the future, but there's no future subjunctive that I can recall. Let me double check that actually. Let's see here. I need Wallace. All right. Let's see. Gender. There are future subjunctives, yes. So 463, 567, 460. Wait, what? Wait a second. Subjunctive 463, future tense. Subjunctive 463. I don't see it in there. 567. Let's see. Future occurs in the indicative, participle, and infinitive forms in the New Testament. Of the 1,623 future forms, there are only 12 participles and 5 infinitives. The rest are indicatives. In general, the future tense may be charted as follows: past, present, or future. Okay. So it does not occur, but the subjunctive can be futuristic. Got it. So, yeah, there's no future. You won't see a subjunctive with the future. But depending on the force of the context, you might, if the future seems to be in view, it might be futuristic as a subjunctive, and therefore future more probable in the third class condition. But keep in mind, the apodosis can be in any tense. Now, the present general, though, is a little different. It's a condition that is generally true at all times, but the apodosis has to have a present tense verb. The hypothetical is a condition that assumes the protasis would not actually be true, but if it were, then the apodosis would be true. The verb in the apodosis can be in any tense. So it's a condition that assumes the protasis would not actually be true, but if it were, then the apodosis would be true. So these are 3 specific use cases. If you look at them in your Greek grammar, beyond the basics, it'll help you figure out with examples what you're looking for, and help give you something to compare it to. So here's a summary. You got the first, second, and third conditions. The protasis is true. The protasis is false. The third has no assumption. Protasis would be E plus indicative, any tense, negated. It's negated by U. Keep that in mind. The second class, it's E plus indicative. It could be aorist tense or imperfect tense in the protasis. It's negated by me. The third class condition, it uses aeon plus subjunctive, negated by me. The apodosis in the first class condition, any mood, any tense. Second class condition must have on, plus the indicative. It could be aorist, it could be imperfect. It uses imperfect for the present. Keep that in mind. And then third, any mood, any tense in the apodosis. That's kind of how those work. We're going to see plenty of the third class condition and first class condition in 1 John. That's why we're double downing on all of these conditional aspects. And with that, we are done. Give yourself a round of applause because you made it 36 chapters through the Blue Hymnal. It's not easy, but you did it. And now is the rewarding part, using it. Okay? So you should be finishing up your workbook, finish practicing the workbook, but then next week, come ready with a pencil, plenty of paper, and we're going to work through our translation. Get a copy of what I would recommend, Nestle Aland 27. The most recent one is Nestle Aland 28. I don't have it, so I'm going to use Nestle Aland 27. You can use 28. That's fine. Is it 27 or 28? I think I have 27. Hold on. So my hard copy, I've got the large margin edition with big text, and super helpful for taking notes and writing in my Greek New Testament. This is, I believe this is the 27th edition, which is out of date. I believe they're on the 28th edition right now. Yep, this is the 27th edition. So if you want a hardbound copy, look for large margin. They exist. They're out there. Much easier to take notes and write in. Otherwise, if you get the regular one, it's like this big. So it's funny. But you do you and whatever you want to do there. I'll be using the digital copy here on screen, so you can follow along that way if you want, if you don't want to buy it. But mine will be the 27th version there as well. The latest version is the 28th. It might be nice to have that. I'm not willing to buy it. Come ready with that stuff so we can translate. I'll also be using BDAG as our primary dictionary, our lexicon. You can follow along with that. That'll also be on screen when we need it. And then Wallace, which I just had, that was the first edition. I think they're on a second or third edition now. So I would recommend getting that. Have that handy. You can get digital versions of all of this via Accordance. I think you can also get it through Logos software. I think BibleWorks no longer exists, so I think it's Logos. My recommendation is Accordance, but you can go with whatever you feel like if you want a digital version. So come ready to translate. We will review several topics, and then we will translate each chapter week by week to practice those topics. So next week we're going to practice... Let's see... No, that's not what I wanted. Oh, is this the tag? Okay. No, it's not the tag. What in the world? Here, go here. Let's see, I want to find it. So next week, we'll review prepositions and conjunctions. And then we'll translate 1 John 1. And then the following week, we'll review conditional statements. We'll translate 1 John 2. The following week, we'll review genitive and dative. We'll translate 1 John 3. The following week, we'll focus on infinitive and participles. Translate 1 John 4. The following week, we'll practice, we'll learn about textual criticism, and then we'll translate 1 John 5. Each time, we're going to focus, in 1 John 1, we're going to focus on prepositions and conjunctions. 1 John 2, we're going to focus on conditional statements. So that's where we're really going to pause. 1 John 3, we're going to focus on genitive and dative. 1 John 4, we're going to focus on infinitive and participles. And 1 John 5, we're going to focus on textual criticism. So that's kind of the format for the rest of the next 5 weeks. I hope you are excited. This is kind of like the whole point, right? You learn the language to do something with it, to read, to translate, interpret. It's exciting. So I hope you are ready to dive into 1 John. I am super stoked for it. And that's it. So if you haven't already, if you're just now getting into the series and joining in, feel free to go back into the archives and watch and review. You can study Mounce at your own pace. You can study Greek at your own pace. You don't need a university to hold you accountable. You could do it yourself. It just takes 30 weeks, and you can do this. 30 weeks is less than a year. Think about that. Within 30 weeks, if you do the vocabulary at the same time, within 30 weeks, you'll be able to sight read 75% of the New Testament, and you'll be able to interpret the New Testament with the help of your resources from the original language. And then that joke, oh, it's all Greek to me, that's out the window. You can scoff at that. Okay? So that's the point. This is exciting stuff. Thanks for joining. Hit subscribe. Hit the like button if you liked this video, because this is a stream, but it will be archived. If you didn't like it, well, I'm sorry. Hit the dislike button. But hit subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, come back again. We'll see you next week. And then we'll also have our Greek word of the day later today, and again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. We're a little over, we're about halfway done with the Greek word of the day, which is cool. And if I remember correctly, with the Greek word of the day, we've reached 66% of the New Testament. So with the words we've learned, we're able to cover 66% of the New Testament at a sight reading level. So basically 2 of 3 words. That's pretty good. So we just got to keep at it, and we'll get to that 75% marker, which is pretty good, 3 of 4 words. So enjoy the UEFA Champions League final between Liverpool and Tottenham today. It kills me, but I'm going to root for Tottenham, even though I'm a Chelsea fan. I just would like to see a team who's not won it. I'd like to see them win it. Liverpool's won it, so I'd rather see Tottenham win it. That's my take on the matter. But yeah, that's it. And then I'll be online later playing some PUBG, probably. So there you go. Have a good one. Hasta la vista. Hasta la bye-bye. Hasta luego. Sayonara.